what else? Did you have any other questions? Because you're always fascinated by like how it works.
Yeah.
Like you talk about like if people just knew this and
I think that's the thing is because for me, intellectually understanding something like these core emotions is one thing. And I think therapy can get people to that point where you understand it intellectually, you create new associations between whatever that, deep, emotion is, and you start changing your perspective. But it's still from a cognitive, rational, you see yourself in a situation and you start seeing, oh, that I don't have to think about it that way.
yeah.
But it's still very like cognitive, intellectual. And
So,
and I
and the secret of this whole thing that I've realized from my own therapy, and again, I'm not putting down therapists at all. Like I did have a lot of healing moments, had a lot of change in my life from the first therapist that I work with, and they're always loving, well-intending people. So I don't mean to put, but if you're not aware of what's going on with the egoic mind and how it works, and so one of the things, if you do it through a talk method, you have to realize that the egoic mind has its own structure and way of understanding the world and its itself in it. And to tell you the truth, it doesn't want to break out of that. It doesn't want to change. It
yeah,
wants to stay in the confines of what it feels it knows, which is safe. And this work involves breaking out of that to have access to whole new thoughts that the ego at that time doesn't have access to. And so what the ego does, it's a protective survival mechanism. So it'll just do so much to change, but won't really change enough to have this deep shift, which
yeah.
is why you might hear someone saying, but I've done so much work already. And what do you mean that I haven't changed? I journaled a lot and my therapist said I'm doing really, really well. And this is all true, but because the problem is very severe and it keeps on recurring, you almost have to break out of what the ego knows, but it can't do that. It has to stay within the structure of how it knows itself.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I've come to realize is that we take in all of the stimuli from the environment, our brain processes it, and then creates an image in our mind of what's going on.
Yeah.
Therefore, by definition, what we think is going on is, you could say, a model of reality. It is a perception that's been processed to try to make sense of what's going on. And a lot of information is lost. A lot of information is filtered
Yeah.
out because you don't really need to know that
And
for
it's
your for
your individual mind that's creating its own structure. So your wife has her own structure, your kid has their own structure, and they're all uniquely individual.
yeah. So once people have this understanding, okay, all of this information, I'm only getting a part of it. And therefore, I'm creating a story, I'm creating a narrative for me in this situation. And that's not probably the full story. There's other information that's being lost. That's being missed. And part of that then relates to the difference between intellectually understanding something because you, as your egoic mind, has created this projection, this, story of what's happening. And when you stop living in that perception, when you start opening yourself up to other input that has been filtered out, you start realizing things about what's going on,
Yeah, you have a
of
broader sense. You're not
what's really
in the
happening.
confines of the egoic structure. The difficulty is most people believe that structure and they believe that's who they are. It's a thought structure.
Yeah, they identify with
Me
that.
and my environment. But now they've identified with it. That's who they are, which is why, if you sometimes if you push an egoic mind too much, it'll get defensive. What do you mean that, I shouldn't be doing this with my kids? What do you mean that my mother da da da? They'll start to push back and stuff because now you're going outside of that. So the difficulty is not just that you have this thought structure, the difficulty is more that you identified with it. You think that's who you are. You're not. And
Yeah.
so, and the difficulty and the thing that makes you identify with it, there's a video on this one too. The glue that makes you stick to that egoic thought structure is the feelings. If the feelings are too strong in the body around that story about your daughter, your wife, your job, it's going to
Mm.
be really hard to not believe that story because you'll start to feel anxiety, you'll start to feel depression, you'll start to feel all these feelings that the mind then concludes, of course, this is real. I feel anxiety about it.
This is interesting because a lot of maybe the stereotype of someone who is spiritually enlightened is like a monk on a mountain,
Yeah.
serene, tranquil, not, dealing with emotions, not giving a care about the day-to-day, problems. And so that's what came to my mind when you're saying that is it because they have created a different understanding, or they have a different understanding. They didn't create anything. They just have a different understanding of the world, and therefore they don't get caught up in that story, in that narrative the ego creates? Or
So
is it
understand what we're talking about here is described in so many different ways by so many different teachers and books. And so, me trying to describe it is just my way of saying it. And someone else will say, well, Krishnamurti says this about it. And, Alan Watts says something like that about it, which is fine. But I just want to make sure people know, like, this is not definitive. It's just the way I sort of
mm,
see it. So what's possibly happened there, and I don't really know I mean, it's very well possible for a person to think that they're spiritual and they think the whole point of being spiritual is just to be relaxed all the time.
mm,
And so there is a spiritual teacher that I saw online who I used to see their videos and they wrote books on it. They were spiritual teachers. They admitted they were a spiritual teacher and stuff like that. But then they also said, I was also suppressing my anger. I didn't realize I was suppressing my anger. And as a result of that, I had like terrible, terrible body pain
mm,
because I didn't realize what I was actually doing was suppressing my anger
mm.
and stuff. So what can happen on this spiritual pathway a lot is a person becoming a spiritual person,
Yeah,
because you think this is the way it's supposed to look.
yeah.
So that's part of it, what can happen.
I think if someone is seeking enlightenment, they're trying to change something in their lives. I think they probably are only at the very beginning of the journey, in the
Yeah.
sense that they still
The
identify.
ego is suffering. Yeah, the ego is suffering. The structure that it's created for itself isn't working out. The story's not matching up what it needs to be in the head. My husband's not loving me enough and not making enough money. My mom's being terrible to me. It's just not working out. So the ego usually ends up on kind of some kind of therapeutic then spiritual path because it's suffering. And sometimes what people call awakening is what we just talked about earlier. The emotional glue that caused who you really are to stick to that egoic story melts. It just dissolves. And then you see, wow, that was all just a story in my head of this character. It was nothing like what actually reality is, just this. And then my mind put all of this story on it. I mean, just take a look at the president of the United States and all the stories that are like imposed, no matter who's president. It doesn't really matter and stuff. But you're not really dealing with what's actually in front of you. And so when the emotions dissolve enough, the body can then look and be much more relaxed because what that ego does in trying to understand imposing the story is it inflates all of this emotion. It inflates it all. It makes a concern into this gigantic problem because now it's about me and my boss, me and my daughter and who they're dating. It's now become this thing. And so now it just really looms up and inflates it almost artificially when you think about it.
Yeah. And this is actually why meditation is a way of just experiencing, you know, what's happening right now in this moment, not thinking, not projecting, not obsessing about the past. It's just like right now, just taking in, what your environment,
Yeah.
whatever's happening. It's
Yeah, but I tell people
training.
meditation, like the purpose of meditation is not to stop your thinking. Because some people say, I don't want to learn meditation because I can't stop my thinking. And like, it's not, I have ADHD. I can't stop my thinking either. And I don't think you ever stop your thinking until you're dead. The point of it is you see that you're not your thinking. You're in usually what happens is even unbeknownst to you, the meditative pieces come up, taking over your consciousness, and now you can actually sort of see the thought character,
Yeah.
thinking, worrying about stuff.
I think this is the first step to separating yourself from your egoic mind. You're a little bit detached. You can take a step back and realize, oh, I'm thinking about this. Like that is an essential insight into how your brain works or how your mind works. You're not identified with that. You
Yes,
are
it is like
separate from it.
and it is sort of like a Christopher Nolan movie with a big reveal at the end. Oh my gosh, the person that I thought was this was never actually that. The person who I thought I was Was never. That was just a character. It was just a person. Because your identity now has shifted energetically to something different, something greater than just your thought character.
And so then how about those emotions then? When we I guess it's because we identify with those emotions and therefore we suffer because of the emotions. And if we had that detachment, we didn't identify with that, then it wouldn't have that power over us.
You could say that. I'm definitely when I've seen the energetic attachment to a person's story dissolve, which sometimes people call an ego death. So it's not like they have amnesia and they don't remember who they are or where they were born. It's just that there's not as much of an emotional attachment to that story anymore, even about their own children. So they're now able to talk to their child who has an addiction issue, but from a calmer place because the ego is not inflating it and making the feelings too out of control to deal with. It's gone down a lot. And so when that happens, in psychology terms, that's been called an ego death. So you have all the thoughts of the ego. You're just not related to it as who you are as much, and your body will follow suit. It'll just be more relaxed around triggers that would really have gotten to it before.
Yeah.
And I should say that. So here, what's a little bit different here is there is definitely, you know, a disillusion or a dissolving of that emotional glue to the story of the character here. However, it was also seen that the the way this brain was born, the mental health conditions of it, the neurodivergence of it being on the spectrum, still creates like strong, sharp, anxious explosions of behavior and emotion, like an autistic child, you know. So that, and I tell people when you do this work, if you're ADHD or autistic or something like that, it doesn't take that away. So like, this body, therefore, is easily startled by certain things. That still happens. The body's easily startled. What's different is that whole story that comes afterwards. There I am getting all upset again. I'm such a loser. This is terrible. Like here's what, because of that, all this stuff happened. When the body has this kind of emotional reaction, it just goes up and it goes down. There is a little bit of a calming period, but then an hour or two later, it's like as if nothing happened.
Yeah.
That whole,
That,
yeah.
generational trauma, this is just, informed who you are as an individual or who anyone is based on their previous experiences, all these different things. It just is what it is. So
Yeah.
there's no
And it,
value judgment. It's not good or bad. It just is.
Yeah. It's just that when the ego was around, it was definitely making a value judgment out of it. It
Yeah.
was definitely like morally, and people who are emotionally dysregulated, a lot of the feeling that they feel a lot is self-loathing. They already feel bad. So sometimes they don't even want to know that they have these conditions and
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah.
And that it's because they feel bad because there's a certain expectation of how they should be, how they should behave, their career,
Yes.
the way they live their lives, etc. And
Yeah.
so they feel that somehow they haven't done what they're supposed to do, and they feel bad about it. But that is imposed by others. That is a
It
societal,
is. It's societal
expectation.
constructs, but when you're really stuck in the throes of an addiction, when I work with people who are like that, they're they're in that construct. They want to go back to work. They want to earn money. They want to be like everybody else. There's very few people that were born like that realize it's okay to be different. It's okay to not quite fit in. It's okay to, be your own drummer and somehow make your own path. For a lot of people who had these emotional dysregulation conditions, because they were so conditioned to, yes, you have to work within the economic system and support your family, they're constantly having problems because they're trying to go back to that structure, which their body wasn't necessarily designed to work in well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe if society had better understanding of these issues, there would be more of a place for everyone in society, as opposed to the neurotypical expectation of, 9 to 5 job, pay your taxes, etc. Like there's
Yeah,
different ways to contribute to society. There's different ways that you can
there are,
live
and
a
they were,
satisfying
and we're
life.
on the outskirts. Well, we're energy healers, Reiki professionals. Yeah, sometimes we were in the therapy fields. Sometimes we're coaches like me and stuff. But back in primitive cultures, people like that maybe might have been the shaman or the medicine person of the village or something like that. They're not really functioning well in terms of like helping the tribe to function well there, but we're people come to us because we're more seem to be more spiritually connected somehow to something greater and stuff. So yeah.